It's been a little bit of a hiatus for me, but I'm coming back to a brand new game system, at least for me, called Team Yankee World War III. And in this video, I'm going to be painting up the Israeli Defense Force. Using this mix of models over here, a combination of infantry, Nagmashad infantry fighting vehicles, Magak 6 tanks, accompanied by 2 full platoons of my favorite modern tanks, the Merkava. These are Merkava 2s and 1s. And in support, I have 3 Perry anti-tank vehicles and some American-supplied Chaparral anti-air vehicles. This is my first Team Yankee force, and I think this is fairly balanced, although it is fairly embarrassing to play them in its natural form, which is this very eclectic mix of plastics, pewter, and resin. Really is not pleasing to look at, so let's paint them up. Before painting, it is worth noting that some of these tanks have pretty nice pegs on them, like this Magak over here or the Merkava. They will stay on pretty good, but others like the Pere, they are terrible. You just shake them a little bit and the turret falls off. Same thing with the Chaparral especially. So in order to prevent these from dropping off, I'm going to be putting a magnet in these little holes over here and then a metal strip on the other. So I just drop a magnet in with some super glue, let it set. And then on the opposite side, I use these very thin pieces of metal that I cut out of dollar store baking tins. I have a video on the upper right hand corner that will show you how to do that, but cut them into small little strips like this with a sheet metal cutter, and then using some super glue, just attach it to the opposite side. And then once the glue is set on both of these, you can use glue accelerator like this to speed up the process. It will drop in place, magnetize, and not fall off anymore. So both the Pere and the Chaparral have the same issue. I do the same thing with the Pere over here. I usually put the magnet in the little indent, and then on the flat side of the Pere over here, I put a bigger piece of steel, super glue it in place, and it will achieve the same thing, allowing it to be magnetized and not fall off as easily. Now that all of that is done, I'm going to start painting. I start with a black primer that I apply onto all the vehicles all the way around. You can do them one by one like this, or you can put them on a sheet of paper and do a whole bunch of them at a time, but it's important to get coverage all over the model like I'm showing here. Holding the pieces by hand like this can be a little bit messy, so if you do not want to do it this way, you can always put it on a piece of paper and use it to rotate your model around. Note that while I'm doing this with an airbrush, you can easily use an aerosol primer as well. And with this method, you should be able to prime your entire army black very quickly. Next, I'm going to go for a Zenithl highlighting effect, which I'm also going to be using an airbrush over here. First of all, I'm going to be painting the underside of all the models with a very light dusting of this white primer. And then I turn the models around and hit it with white primer from a 45-degree angle all the way around it. This creates shadowing towards the bottom and highlights towards the top. It naturally brings out the 3D effect of all these models. Here you can see me manually handling each piece. You can also put them on a piece of paper or paper towel to spin it around. Again, all of this can be done with an airbrush or a simple aerosol primer in white. To speed things up, you can also Zenithal highlight in groups like I'm showing here. Just put them all on a piece of paper, and afterwards just kind of hitting it. Like over here, I hit the undersides of it very lightly, and then after that hit it at a 45-degree angle from the top to get Zenithal highlighting very quickly on a lot of models at once. Doing this in assembly line style will get you an entire army Zenithal highlighted in very quick time. When selecting the paint scheme for my Israeli Defense Force, I looked at several different sources, including the Army book, but what I really liked was what I saw in this video over here, which is a very tan version of the desert camouflage. So I'm going to be using this scheme on all my models, and in order to do this, I'm going to be using Pallet Bone Speedpaint right here from Army Painter. Of course, you can easily apply this with a brush. It is more tedious, takes more time, and uses a lot more paint. Or you can go ahead and apply it with an airbrush. If you haven't bought an airbrush yet, this is one of the reasons to really consider it. It really speeds up your process as I'm showing here. Unlike Zenithal highlighting, you're going to want to put this all over the model. Do not oversaturate it. You want to go with several light dustings each time, but you want full coverage in all the models. You're going to trust the Zenithal highlight before it to bring out the natural shadows of the model without worrying too much about these speed paints doing it. You want to just use the speed paints almost like an airbrush color and apply it all over the model from all sides. Here you can see me airbrushing everything as a group, putting several models on a piece of paper at once and just hitting them all in one fell swoop. This really speeds up the entire process. For the IDF infantry, I went back to this documentary that I saw on YouTube, and basically their uniforms have the same color as all the tanks that they accompany. So I go ahead and apply the same color onto the infantry that I did on the tanks. Using the same Pallet Bone, I paint them all over the infantry models in similar fashion to the tanks before this. Now these infantry models are a lot smaller, so applying the Pallet Bone speed paint with a brush is actually pretty practical for these. Here is the entire army fully painted up very quickly with this method. Now let's apply some details. I'm going to be using Barbarian Flesh for any flesh tones, Leather Brown for any sacks or packs, Brigandine Brown for tracks, and I'm going to be using Grim Black for any of the guns and weapons. First, I start with Brigandine Brown, and this is going to go on all the tracks. Each vehicle has a slightly different track layout. For instance, over here on the Merkavas, you will be applying them onto the bottom of the tracks like this, and then in between the tracks like this over here. But at the same time, it's got an armored skirt, and the armored skirt is going to be covering a lot of area, so you do not have to paint whatever you can't see. Just paint anything that is visible. Another example is this chaparral over here. It's got a lot more exposed track both at the top and at the bottom. In this particular case, you want to be able to hit the tracks all the way around, and it may look like a tight squeeze, but it's not. A lot of times you'll be surprised how much your brush is able to reach and get in between. That's why I don't mind painting any of my models fully assembled. A lot of times the paint can get to anywhere you can see, and anywhere you can't see, just don't paint it. Next, I use Barbarian Flesh for, you guessed it, any exposed skin areas. For instance, any of the tank commanders, they may have exposed faces or hands. I paint it with this Barbarian Flesh color. On the infantry, it goes on the faces and also their arms. Bear in mind that these are desert warriors. They'll fight in very humid and hot environments, so a lot of them actually have their long sleeves folded up. And as you can see here, I'm painting their faces and their entire forearm and hands. Next, I switch to Leather Brown, and this goes on all the backpacks as well as the waist packs of all the infantry models. Now, anything that's based on real world or historical models are great in the sense that their uniforms are usually very heavily camouflaged. In this case, you can see that the tones are very similar to stay camouflaged and hidden from the enemy. This also makes painting a lot simpler. Note that if you're painting the chaparral anti-air, you're going to want to paint these areas with Leather Brown as well. The seats on the chaparral and this area in the front of the chaparral, which carries all these backpacks and sacks. Next, I'm going to switch to Grim Black Speed Paint this time, not acrylic paint, and I'm going to be applying it onto all the weapons. These weapons mounted on the top of the turrets are going to get black, and the reason why I use Grim Black instead of matte black or any other acrylic black is that it both paints and highlights the black at the same time. If I had used an acrylic form of black, I would have to come back and highlight it with maybe some gray or some white, and it really kind of adds to the time to paint all these up. So applying Grim Black allows me to very quickly lay down these colors and have highlights at the same time. Besides the weapons, you're also going to want to put this onto any of the helmets. Over here, it's going to be on the mics as well as the goggles of the commanders. And depending on the commander model, like this one over here, he actually has a strap that goes all the way around his helmet, so you just have to take a look at the sculpt and adjust accordingly. Next, for the infantry, the first thing I paint black are all the guns and the weapons. Almost all the weapons are going to be painted black, but I do have some exceptions. I do paint the RPGs black, any of the law anti-tank I paint black as well. But there's also this dragon launcher over here that I left naturally brown. This is just to help me distinguish it on the tabletop. All I do in this case is just paint the bipod black just to give it a little bit of a point of interest, but otherwise I leave it in the natural palette bone. Next area that gets Grim Black are going to be the boots of the troops right here. You want to paint them all the way around like this. A lot of the IDF troops also have a black band that goes around their helmet. It's a fairly distinctive paint scheme, and I do this so that I can actually tell them apart from, let's just say, US troops or British troops and so on. It makes them very distinctive. For the guys with the FN mags, which are these machine guns, they may have ammo belts under your bags like this. I paint those black as well. Now that we're done with the colors, I'm going to be applying some washes. First, starting with flesh wash, I just dab them very liberally onto any of the skin tone areas. This gives it nice shading very quickly and makes the models really pop and come to life. Also, don't forget to paint all the commanders on top of the cupolas of any of your tank turrets. Another color I use is this Aegis Aqua, which is a nice light blue, and I apply this onto the lens of any of the goggles. This gives it a glass-like appearance. And then afterwards I switch to Strong Tone by Army Painter, which is a great wash. I apply it first onto the tracks to make them look nice and shadowed, and I also use it as a weathering and like a dirt effect on the tanks. I apply it in the back and the front and along the skirts to make it look a little bit dirty and worn. For the chaparral, these areas in brown also get the Strong Tone wash. I put some Strong Tone on the muzzle of the guns to give it this burnt effect. And I put some Strong Tone on the goggles of the commanders to shade them. Next, I move to the infantry, and any of their backpacks or side satchels get this Strong Tone. You'll notice that I do not put Strong Tone on the rest of the models that have the Pallet Bone. That is already speed paint, and speed paint doesn't require any washes. Onward to decals and markings. You're going to be putting these on with some micro set that you can buy on Amazon, and you're going to use some water and tweezers. You'll cut off these decals. Now, I've worked with a lot of different decals, including Citadel and others, and these from Battlefront take the longest time to release. I literally had to soak them in water for 5 to 10 minutes before they freed up. But after they do, they go on the models in these locations fairly easily. Just put some micro set onto these areas over here and then transfer the decals. Once they actually allow themselves to be removed, I apply them onto the models with a brush and some careful placement. On this Merkava here, these numbered decals go on all 3 sides on top of the turret like this, and it looks pretty spiffy once the decals do come off. And you're going to be applying these chevrons onto the side skirts of the tanks. For instance, this Merkava over here. On the Merkava, the side skirts are actually a little bit dimpled, so you're going to use micro sol, which actually makes the decals a little bit soft and conform to those dimples. If the decals are too much of a bother, just use plain old matte white paint, and with a very fine detailing brush, you can actually easily freehand in all the chevrons and all the rest of the markings on the tank like I'm showing here. I am very carefully just applying the chevron onto the side of this parade tank, and I actually found that freehanding the markings on were actually a lot faster than waiting for those darn decals to release from their sheets. Honestly, Battlefront, you guys really need to fix your decal sheets. Moving on to the last steps, I apply some simple basing onto all the infantry models. I use some white glue or Elmer's glue, or in this case a dollar store knockoff glue, and apply it onto the base like this, and then using an old brush I smear it all over the top of the base, very careful not to get it onto the models. And then after that I just dunk the entire base into the basing material, which in this case is from Army Painter called Brown Battleground. It really suits this theme very well. And then after that I clean up the rims of the bases with some simple black primer just to get rid of any of the overspray and to just clean things up. Finally, I protect all my work with 2 coats of matte clear varnish. Here are some completed pictures of my Israeli Defense Force army, very quickly done and ready for the tabletop. Honestly, they look really good with this very simple paint scheme, and you too can be able to get your entire army onto the table looking great and with very little effort. Thanks for watching this video, and I hope you join me for future Team Yankee content.